And welcome to the program on this Tuesday, 106:41 right now, and temperatures outside the FM Metro sitting at a comfortable 85 degrees with less humidity than the other day. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. If you want to be a part of the program today, feel free to do so. 701-293-9000 is the Red Wing shoe line. Again, 701-293-9000. Or you can send those weather or ag-related topics and questions via email to weatherorag@flagfamily.com. I'm meteorologist Justin Storm with Ag Director Bridgette Readel. And Bridgette, how are you doing today on this beautiful afternoon so far?
It's going well over here, Justin. I'm in Dickinson. It's warm, but it's not the worst it could be. I guess I haven't really been outside yet to tell you what we're looking at for temperature. But
Yeah,
it's
I could
okay.
probably find that out over there in western North Dakota by pulling up good old Endon here, the weather network across the state.
I would think that we might be able to find an answer to it, but the reality is you could practically hear corn growing on a day like today.
Right on, yeah. You got 78 degrees over there in Dickinson. A little cooler
Wow.
than here, surprisingly. Usually out west is a tad
Well,
warmer than us in the valley.
it usually is, but I guess we'll wait and see what the day brings. It's fairly calm. There's just a slight wind, which has been super helpful because we do know that more and more spray rigs have been out in the field getting caught up with fungicide in their wheat and other crops as well.
Indeed, and let's see. What's the ideal wind situation, or what's too much wind? Maybe is a better way of putting
So
it. What's that threshold at?
really most of the time our federal labels will tell us that you would want a 3 to 10 mile an hour wind. You don't want it completely calm because then you have too much opportunity for products to pick up and move. You want just a little bit of wind, but once you get over 10 and certainly over 15, I think that's top end on most federal labels, you're just getting too much wind speed where things are going to move around. It would wreck your pattern. You'd have physical movement of the product, not just potential.
All right, well, it might be a little breezy then for afternoon sprayings here in the valley for the next few days, but you can utilize
It
a
might
handful of
be.
hours in the mornings before the winds start to pick up in the late morning to afternoon. Generally, we'll see 10 to 20 mile per hour winds gusting to about 25 over the next handful of days. Even into the weekend, Sunday will probably contain the least amount of wind, about 5 to 15. So Sunday's looking like a good day for spraying, if you have any that still needs to be done.
Well, and there's plenty of things that have to get taken care of because we've got crop kind of all over the board. Our small grains got in early. That wasn't bad, but we've got little beans, little corn, and a lot of things in between. And with the wet weather we've had, we really have to keep up with our fungiciding, especially in our sugar beet crop, because we do know that wet weather with the dense canopy of leaves holds a lot of moisture in there and can lead to disease patterns pretty fast.
Hmm. Hey, I had someone call into a program earlier today talking about weather conditions for haying, and that led
Yes.
into a question. Well, first, I guess I was hoping you could explain a little bit on what haying is and how you do it, and then also how long of a period of dry weather do you need to kind of optimize haying?
Okay, so let's make sure I cover all of those questions. First of all, if you're going to be cutting hay, there's some factors that matter. How dense is the swath of what you're cutting? How wet is it when you start to cut it? Because if you're taking something that's at pretty high moisture, you need to leave it a little longer drying time. If you have really thick swaths, it's going to take longer to dry down before you want to put it into that hay. We can hay through most of the summer. There are areas, particularly as we get into South Dakota, where it's easy for them to cut that hay ground. So think of like an alfalfa mix. They may cut it 3 or 4 times. We're not as likely to see that many cuttings here because we have a shorter growing season for the crop to rebound. And also, it really matters on how much moisture we've had, which as of late has been plenty, Justin Storm.
Hmm.
Thanks for
You're
sharing all
welcome.
of that. And also, you'll see that bales, once you get them baled up, they don't always get pushed into a haystack right away because you want to make sure that they aren't wet so that they can't cause problems with high heat, high moisture, etc. So there's a number of factors that would go into it. Was that all the things I needed to answer?
I think that was just about everything you needed to answer, Bridgette. So thank you for the
Great.
explanation.
Great.
All right, let's see.
I'm here to help and also guzzle iced
Yes.
tea when the camera's not on me. So
Yes.
thanks, Addison.
Well, you should leave the microphone
Cheers to
on
you.
so we can hear the glub 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 glub.
There it goes.
Go. I just thought I'd give you the wind sound effects. I'm here to help.
And Bridgette is always helping with all different explanations.
Anything.
And we got a few topics we're going to dive into throughout the course of this hour. I think we got through everything on yesterday. But we are going to touch on sustained natural fertilizers in Minnesota, as well as shipping worldwide, as well as hurricane preparedness for farmers. What should farmers need to know or consider in preparation for hurricanes, especially for areas along the Gulf and East Coast?
You know, I'll be honest with you. That is just ironic and slightly painful that I had this topic on for prepping for hurricanes
It is
because
hurricane
I was curious.
season.
Well, I was curious, what do farmers along the Gulf State region have to do? And then our neighbors in southern South Dakota, western Minnesota, and northwestern Iowa are flooding. And it's amazing how those similarities would occur between hurricanes and flood situations. I didn't think I would ever be having this discussion, but yet here we are.
Hey, here we are, and you never know when a hurricane is going to bear down on North Dakota. It more than likely never will happen, by the way.
I would say that's probably more than likely the case. Yeah, rather rarely ever going to happen. But there's some things to keep in mind. You know, if we have any sort of damage to property, all of us immediately think, oh, got to talk to the insurance agent. But, you know, you have a lot of stuff that's probably still under loan. And we'll be talking with Greg Steman he's our farm finance insider today with Starion Bank. And, you know, if you have damage, you've got to let your bank know because it's still under loan. Or if you have loans through the Farm Service Agency with USDA, you would need to let them know as well. I realized then that in Florida, your emergency response person is the extension agent in each Florida county. But I don't think that's the case in our states up here. So I would be curious if people know who their emergency response folks are to try to coordinate the aftermath of such situations. You know, you have to make sure you move animals whenever possible. Some of the floodwaters that were coming so quickly did not give folks time to move their animals. They were simply cutting fences and trying to make sure that animals could get away under their own natural instincts, which is going to be a problem when later you have to go find them and make sure you know what happened to them and that they're safe and not injured. We saw the loss of hay that simply washed away, or silage piles in some of this floodwater that's been happening. And then additionally, you might not think about this as well, but all of that fencing that's going to have to be repaired, whether it was washed out or cut, buildings are going to be damaged, the debris that has to be cleaned up that may have caused injury to animals, and your crop. You had crop in the ground that was planted that right now, if the soil moved, you could have washed all of that away, or you may have like small plants that are sitting in overland flooding. And as the temperatures warm up, it's almost like turning the pot to simmer on the stove. And those plants continue to get warmer as the temperature increases. And that's not good for them either. So there's a lot of things going on right now with all of this flooding happening around our region.
Yeah, and it's not just the flooding that's impacting farmers and agriculture. We've been talking a lot about that heat dome that's set up over the south, the southeast, and the east. Portions of the United States, and for quite some time now, that's been bringing in 90s and triple-digit heat temperatures and real likes in the 100 and teens. What has that been affecting on crops in those areas? I don't know if you have any insight on that, but how is that heat playing a role in some of the crops that are grown down there in the southeast and central southern plains?
Well, they're more adapted to it, right? They're raising a crop that's ready for all of that excessive heat. In fact, there are even genetics now in cattle and in sheep to help them be more drought tolerant, if you will, but I guess I should call that heat stress. They're more tolerant to heat stress. And, that their livestock are thinner hided. They're not using the same, not using quite all of the same genetics that we would up here with some of our animals. But as far as the crop is concerned, as you get further south, you have some crop that's really ready for that intensive heat and more moisture, but also you might be growing 2 crops in a season where you're going to be double cropping that system. And so you really want your soybeans to push it fast, or whatever was planted first, so you could get back in there, plant your second crop before it's time to harvest. There's some big differences in how we farm here versus where you might say North Carolina.
Yeah, I could only imagine. Think it'd be kind of cool to be able to do 2 crops in one season, or I guess in my situation, being able to rock a garden almost year round would be kind of fun.
It would be kind of fun. And if I farmed, no doubt my stress level would be fairly high, but I wonder what some of that would be like for me as well. The stress of trying to keep up with 2 crops instead of just one,
Yeah, no
in the
kidding.
season, two total growing seasons.
Huh. Very interesting. Very
We'll
fun.
see.
Well, hey, you got any questions about some of the topics we've been talking about so far, or a few of the topics that we are going to be talking about? Feel free to reach out to us on the Red Wing Shoe line. That's 701-293-9000. Email to the program is weather or ag at flagfamily.com, as well as our comment boxes available there on Facebook and YouTube Live, where we live stream each and every single day. And for the most part, those live streams are pretty entertaining, especially with all the shenanigans that go on in the background. Like I said a couple moments ago, some of the topics we'll get to here in our last couple segments would be sustained natural fertilizers in Minnesota. And we kind of touched on a little bit about hurricane preparation and whatnot for farmers because of all the flood water that's been going on down in South Dakota and Iowa, and just how similar that is to flooding that's associated with hurricanes. We'll touch a little bit more again on that at the bottom of our show. And then also, who was Norman Borlaug? I get that right, Bridgette? Borlaug.
Nope, it's Norman Borlaug. Mm-hmm.
Borlaug. Well, I have no idea who Norman Borlaug is, so we're going to find out what Norman has done or doing or did coming up in just a moment. But when we come back after the American Ag Network, we will hopefully have our guest. If not, we'll just push him back a few moments. That's Greg Steman from Starion Bank. It's our Farm Finance Insiders segment that we do on the last Tuesday of every single month. So if you got any farm finance questions, now's the time to dial the line, 701-293-9000. Ask a Banker right here on the show, coming up next.
and welcome back to Weather and Ag in Focus. We are giving a little time for our guest to arrive today to join us in studio, and that will be Greg Steman, and he is with Starion Bank for the Farm Finance Insider segment that we do every last Tuesday of the month. And here we are, the last Tuesday in June. I mean, I don't know about you, Justin, but I feel like we just really got June started, and boom, she's over.
Yeah. It's almost 4th of July, and where'd summer go, by the way? How can we already be halfway through it?
Well, okay, so we may not have Greg yet, but I do have several things that relate to farm finances, and you may find some of this a little bit interesting. So, is there any chance that you may inherit farmland down the road in your family?
Yes.
Any? Oh, yay for you. Well, first of all,
Maybe.
there's a new opportunity.
There is. I'm like way down at the bottom of the list, but I'm on
But there's a
said list.
possibility. See, you're on the list. And this is not even in the farming simulator game, is it? It's like real.
No. You should have seen the things I did in my farming simulator game, though. There was a big ditch that was separating like 3 of my fields. Well, we cut every tree down in there and filled it in, and I just made one gigantic field.
I'd like to talk to you later about your soil typing, but
It was
sure,
magnificent.
we'll let that go. I am sure it was. Oh, okay. So there is something out there that is called the Sour Farmlands Legacy Farmland Fund. Okay, so here's the deal. When someone retires from farming or they are in the midst of estate planning, they may choose that instead of selling their land to the highest bidder, they could sell or transfer that land in an exchange fund, and they can still keep the ties to the family land that they want. So the land is guaranteed to stay in ag production as long as it's within this fund. SOWER, SOWER, Legacy Farmland Fund, launched last year. And it was because there was a need for something like this in many situations where perhaps you have several siblings who have inherited land. One sibling wants to sell and the others do not. This can be used to try to alleviate that concern. It also can be used as a tax deferred estate planning tool. I know we'll probably get a little more in depth on that when we have Mark Wagner with ND Estate Services join us next week. Mark's going to be in with us a week from today because first of all, he's one of our Here We Grow sponsors for that project. But second of all, for Mark, this is the stuff that he does every day. He can help you walk through how this exchange fund might work and why it could be important to you. A lot of farmland owners are very familiar with a 1031 exchange where their proceeds from a property sale are held by a title company and it's used to buy another property within 180 days. This would be a little bit different. It's a like-kind exchange, so actually no capital gain taxes are incurred. So it's another way to defer capital gains taxes, and depending on your income bracket, it's a little simpler than a 1031. So something to keep in mind. Many of you as landowners may want to consider that.
I would imagine so. That all sounds like some information or some good information there, Bridgette.
Well, you just never know when something like that may pop up and you need to be a part of it. And speaking of being a part of it, a great big thank you to so many of those sponsors who have joined us for our Here We Grow project. 2 of them would include Dakota Bank, which has a branch right here in Fargo. Dakota Bank has been a bank that originated in Aberdeen, South Dakota. They are an ag lender, and they do want to make sure that you know that they are available to help you with your farm, as well as they have been available to help us with our project for Here We Grow. And then also the Steffes Group. They have some upcoming online auctions, no doubt. They're anywhere from real estate to farm equipment to inventory reduction sales for equipment dealers, as well as construction. They cover it all. They do have, unusually so, I guess you could say, they do have an upcoming live auction for farm equipment that is happening July 12th. I remember seeing it on their calendar. So for all of you real in-person auction junkies, you're going to want to check out the Steffes Group's website in order to find out where those live sales are so you can be a part of them. We'd be happy to have you there.
Indeed. We got to get out to we got one of those we got to get out to here soon. I haven't been to
We
one.
do. Well, that would be kind of fun. Although I would tell you, please don't wave at me across the crowd. That just means we bought something.
We got Dean's credit card.
And we just
Should be
made,
all right.
we work with Dakota Bank. So if we're going to keep working with Dakota Bank, why wouldn't we
I mean,
try
look,
to have something to
we
buy?
brought his credit score up from a 500 to a 680 just last year alone. Imagine what good we could do this year.
I know. He should just let us do his taxes for him too. I'm sure that's a better idea.
Nah, he can do his own taxes.
So I was talking about that, the difference between a 721 or a 1031 exchange for farmland. Interesting to know that North Dakota cropland values have really gone up significantly while we see cash rents just having a modest gain. This is the third year in a row where North Dakota cropland values have increased more than 10%. So if you have that little parcel of land that you're very particular about or very proud of, just know that it's worth a little bit more. The largest land price increases occurred in the north central part of the state as well as the south central. Those areas saw increases of more than 20%, which was a pretty big surprise, not only to people in the area, but probably to the buyer. So why are we seeing some of this happen? Well, we think that there are still a lot of folks who have some cash on hand that are willing to buy and want to continue farming. You may also see in some of those really big farmland sales that it was more of a sentimental situation where someone wanted to buy in order to make sure that they got that piece of land that really meant a lot to them. Sometimes the land is tillable and they'll rent that out to someone who's actively farming, and they want the rest of the land for, say, hunting purposes. So sometimes when land prices are really high, and I've heard that from some of our listeners, geez, that was overly priced. I can't believe somebody did that. They maybe just had more of a will to buy it than they were looking at a profit situation. So that may be something to consider.
Yeah, I suppose if you want something bad enough, I mean, you look at the housing market that we're just kind of coming out of, where people were paying $50,000 over asking, no contingencies or inspections, just so they could get the house. I mean, that's insane. You kind of went into it a little bit, but I was going to ask, why is it that we're seeing land prices increase at that rate as well, kind of rivaling or keeping up with the housing market as well? Do you think it's just the inflation, or do you think that it was some of what you had just explained or mentioned?
I think one of the things that we want to keep in mind as well when it comes to farmland is that when you consider investments, and there are some folks out there who certainly have plenty of cash and they're looking for an investment. Land is a precious commodity in the fact that we're not producing any more of it. So it has a limited scale for buyers to buy because there's only so much that's out there. Again, you may have a sentimental tie to it that it means more to you than others may have expected. And so frankly, I think that farmland is still considered a good buy and a good investment in many situations. And folks are just, they want to have that little piece of Americana. So we're still going to continue to see some land being purchased. And it's a business. If you are farming and you want to be farming of a certain size and scale, you're going to buy because it's part of your business. And that's what you need to do for volume on yields and for competition around your neighborhood.
Right. And do you know what the is a kind of ballparkish thing here, what land is kind of going for per acre? I know it's different per area. We could just kind of say as a whole across the state, or maybe if you want to break it up between west and east, or east, central, west.
We actually, when you look at what North Dakota Extension has done to give you a breakdown of it, if you look at the South Red River Valley, when we were back in 2018, we saw that value of about $3,900. Now we're looking at these would be the counties of Trail, Cass, and Richland. That value is looking at on average $6,000 per acre. When you look at the north central region, so think really around Garrison to Minot, out to just shy of of Devil's Lake, you're looking at a region that in 2008 had cropland value of about $1,600 an acre. Now it's at $25,000. So over that few year period, you're seeing some pretty significant jumps. Even in the south central part of the state, if you were going to use like Burley and Kidder County, so Bismarck to Steele, down through Linton, Wysocki, Ashley into the South Dakota line, you'd be going from a similar as Minot was, $1,600 an acre in 2018 to about $2,700 in 2024. So those are just some increases that you see on that. And that's estimated, and those are also averages. We've certainly had some higher numbers that increased our averages over the time as well.
Might have to look into getting some land up by Grand Forks. Maybe start my own little op. I'll have our friend.
That would be awesome.
I believe it was Greg come over and he can combine for me.
That would be okay. I think he would enjoy that.
I think he would as well. Well, we got to hit bottom of the hour news, Bridgette. We're a couple minutes past, but that's all right. When we come back, we got to check on the forecast. We got a couple more ag topics, and Greg from Starion Bank will be joining us. Maybe. We'll see if we can get him on the line here in just a moment. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Excellent. And welcome back. So glad that you are joining us here on Weather and Ag in Focus. We actually have Greg able to join us. So we're really happy that he could, and that is Greg Steman. He is with Starion Bank, and we do our Farm Finance Insider segment on our last Tuesday of the month. Greg, thanks for taking your time out of a really busy day to help us out and answer some questions from listeners.
Well, I apologize for being late. I wish I had a good excuse, and I don't. So thank you very much for being patient with me.
Oh, not a problem
Not
at all.
to worry at all. Nope. Here's the thing. We're just glad we found you, because if I don't show up, the guys are like, so where do you think she's stuck? In a field? In a meeting?
Yeah,
We're not really sure.
No, if we can't find you, it's what can we give away? Or at least one person goes that route.
Well, Greg, if you'd like to give away any sort of cash, I think the listeners are all ears. But that's not where we were headed
all
today.
For it.
I have a feeling that that would probably go over pretty well, wouldn't it?
Yeah, we got people on speed dial just for that specific reason alone. Believe it or not.
Yes.
So, Greg, I have a list of questions for you that we wanted to walk through. One of them was recently there was an article that came out in the Farm Futures magazine, and it talks about two different costs of production and how could farmers be using that, and which might a banker prefer. One's called the cost of production, that covers their actual expenses incurred to grow their crop. The other is the cost of doing business, and it's a bit broader. As a banker who's been doing ag banking for some time, do you have a preference or any way that you like to see farmers come in and visit with you going into this season or next?
I think it's a really good question, and I think it comes down to a producer by producer situation, and also a banker by banker. Some are very comfortable probably just doing the cost of production, which is probably very common and what a lot of people did for a lot of years. And that's something that I would probably typically go with. But the cost of doing business is also, as you said, a little more broad, factors in some more things, and you can probably drill down a little bit easier with that and find some risk factors where you can really maybe mitigate some things, because additional information always has good value as long as it's used effectively. So to be honest with you, it really is. It comes down to what's the customer most comfortable with, and also what is the banker most comfortable with. And sometimes some of those things that are hidden are not really talked about or realized as much, or not as easily recognizable. They become much more apparent when you do a broader evaluation as far as cost of doing business. So that's my answer. Is it comes down to what are you most comfortable with? What's the producer most comfortable with? What's the banker most comfortable with? And also, how much do you have adequate information? And if you get additional information, are you using it properly?
Greg, we were talking earlier about all the flooding that's been going on across the northern plains and really across the country, and how it's been affecting agriculture and whatnot. But how does that influence, say, a banking side of aspects? If you own a piece of equipment, you have a loan on it, technically the bank owns it. Obviously, if you get some flooding and your equipment is ruined because of it, you want to notify your insurance company. But what about on a banking standpoint? Would you want people in contact with you about that kind of information, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, absolutely. We always want to maintain an open line of communication. Now, I'm not saying, hey, you should call a banker before you call the insurance. No, you got to take care of your priorities. If you have an expensive piece of equipment, that's why you carry insurance. That's why you pay the premiums you do, is because, in situations like that where you do incur what could be a really, really large loss, you got to make sure you handle it and effectively communicate with your insurance company. Down the road, obviously, that goes back to the security agreement that you have with the bank. You've pledged, most farmers will pledge their equipment, all of their equipment, UCC filing as collateral, oftentimes for equipment, equipment loans, or sometimes they'll even have it committed to operating lines of credit. So that's something that you're obligated to do as a producer, is to communicate that because that's pledged as security on a bank loan or multiple bank loans. So just that open line of communication, but also with the understanding, and most bankers are going to be this way. We get it. Your priority is take care of your, hopefully your operation first, take care of communication with the insurance agent, insurance company. But when the opportunity presents itself, please let us know what the situation is. And we understand there'll probably be insurance checks coming and things along those lines. But yeah, communication is always invaluable. But it's one of those things you have to do. And I think most banks understand we aren't the absolute priority, but it's pretty important because it's pledged collateral.
Huge points to make, Greg. And one thing that I have been questioned about from an ag perspective, do we think we're in a recession or do we think we're headed there? I'm sure you get lots of insight from other folks, economists that you follow, but any thoughts from a banker's perspective about that?
Well, it's a good question, and I'm always hesitant to say, well, I think this is what's going to happen. And the reason I say that is because I don't want to be in the position of somebody comes back and says, well, you told me you thought this was going to happen. You know what I mean? And so because you told me this is why I made this decision. Now, you can say, hey, well, what are the factors that contribute? And how many of those factors are taking place right now? We've talked about this on some previous shows about the strength of the dollar, things along those lines, how that impacts market prices at times. And it's I've heard a lot of people talk about, yes, a recession is inevitable, or we're definitely headed that way. And at the same time, I'm not exactly sure, to be honest with you, because I think we've all been sitting here waiting to see what's going to happen with interest rates. They kind of held them steady for now. And what are they going to do? What's the Fed going to do? I just think there's so many unknowns right now. And I think if somebody comes up to you and says, I'm pretty sure this is what's going to happen, my response is going to be, I'm pretty sure you have no idea. And I'm sorry. You can look at everything that you think, would indicate something's going to happen. And there's so many people right now just kind of sitting back and going, yeah, the factors might show that it should be happening, but is it really happening? And I think there's just so many unknowns right now, to be honest with you.
Greg, what do you think is on top of farmers' minds as we start planning for the year ahead in 2025? Obviously, a lot of things left to wrap up for this year, but never too early to start thinking about next year. What do you think's on the top of their mind right now?
Well, that's a really good question, because I think everybody, and Bridgette has kind of addressed this too, the cost, the input costs right now are so impactful. I mean, it's just... they're expensive, for lack of a better term, and it's a high cost. And so I think managing input costs, finding out whether it comes to seed, fertilizer, even fuel, for goodness sakes. And this is what's, I sit here and go, nobody's going to be shocked when there's an upcoming presidential election. Nobody's going to be shocked to see fuel prices drop somehow, some way, right? Because they want, and it's as oversimplified as it is, that matters. So if there are some drop in fuel, and people can say, hey, can I contract, to prepay for some fuel at this lower price? I think anytime you can contain those input costs or buy on what is, perceived to be a lower level, those are savings that can multiply themselves over the course of time. So I think any type of bargain or cost savings that you can find when it comes to inputs, and then have that conversation with the banker, because understanding that if you put it on this year's line of credit, that's going to have to be rolled over to next year's line of credit. It's not necessarily that we're coming up short. It's just that we bought some extra things for the following year using this year's line of credit. And I think any banker would understand if you kind of came to him and said, listen, I would be crazy not to have bought this just because of the cost that was, asked of me. So I think those are the things that you want to look at is, can you find a way to manage some costs on the input side for the following year if possible?
Oh, yeah. That's going to be a huge factor in what people are thinking. And especially right now, if you had land that got flooded out and you're not sure that you're going to have a harvestable crop, you've really got to be focusing ahead on what's the rest of your year going to look like and how are you going to, if you have to roll it over to next year, et cetera. I can't imagine some of those decisions right now are ready to be made, but it won't be very easy as we go through towards fall, is my guess.
No, that's a very good point. I couldn't agree more. And my heart goes out to those folks in Iowa and Minnesota and southeast South Dakota. They're just experiencing some really, really difficult times.
It's brutal down there. So many. Let's put it this way: there's so many things that I want to talk about with that flooding, but I don't think we're ready.
Yeah.
Good Lord, the water hasn't
I think you're
receded
right.
yet. So let's not. Yeah, let's not go poke that bear. Let's just wait a while. So, Greg, thank you for taking the time to talk today. And if you could let our listeners know how they can reach you for further questions.
Well, thank you very much. And what it comes down to is just get a hold of us at starionbank.com, or you can call our Fargo office at 701-281-5640. 701-281-5640. We're happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Awesome. Greg, and what was that website one more time, please?
StarionBank.com.
Awesome.
StarionBank, all one word, .com.
Perfect. Well, appreciate it, Greg. Thanks for coming on and talking with us for a little bit. When we come back, a rundown on the forecast, a couple more ag topics, and if you want to join in on the program, ask a question or the conversation, 701-293-9000 is the Red Wing Shoe line. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Arr, matey.
And welcome back to the program, 152.30. We're going to run down on that forecast coming up here in just a moment, but we got a few minutes left of the program. If you want to ask a last-minute question, 701-293-9000. I have 3 open lines for anybody. Bridgette, this is a topic we wanted to go back from yesterday and touch on a little bit, but this was the use of lab-grown meats in the military, or something along the lines of the military targeted for lab-grown meats.
Mm-hmm. So there's a bit of controversy surrounding this. Grant funds have been made available, appropriated nearly $500 million for development of lab-grown meat products by a company called BioMade. BioMade says that they are a manufacturing innovation institute sponsored by the U.S. Department of Defense with a vision to build sustainable domestic end-to-end bioindustrial manufacturing ecosystem. That's a lot of big words, but basically what they're saying is they are going to build lab-grown meats that they can then go ahead and have put into the MREs, the meals ready to eat, for our military. A lot of outcry from any of our livestock, but primarily our beef producers, whether it's RCAF or National Cattlemen's Beef Association, saying, hold on, we produce enough real beef in this country. Why should we force our military, our best and our brightest, to be going out into service by having to eat lab-grown meat? Now, maybe this is because there'll be areas of the world that could be difficult to get fresh products to, such as meat. Not really sure, but I would say that this is going to meet some pretty heavy resistance, particularly in the case that you have the state of Iowa. Their Governor Reynolds just recently signed legislation that says starting July 1st, there has to be correct labeling in grocery stores on meat. You have to identify if it is based on plants. What plants? Was it cellular grown? Is it considered fake? It's going to use a lot of those descriptions in order to give people an accurate understanding of when they're buying meat that was grown in a traditional sense versus some of the other ways that we've seen it. And we've talked about lab-grown meats, 3D printed meats, and so much more.
Just some good old 3D printed chicken nuggets.
I don't think that's what I was here for. No.
Well, I mean, the 3D printed one is something, depending on what it is. If it's actual meat and they're just running it through a 3D printer, that would be another thing, because that's basically what they do with chicken nuggets already. They just throw it in a mold and hit it with a 1-ton press. But
what I have seen of those is this is a company out of Israel. It was called She Meats and She Fish.
Oh.
And what they were using was some sort of digestible material that was, I wouldn't guess I would call that like a chicken or a pork product. And then they were 3D cutting the meat out of that. And I'm actually okay with, I don't love them, but if you were to serve me a veggie burger that's made with peas, lentils, chickpeas that we grow right here in this region, I could stomach that. But if you're telling me that you grew it out of a petri dish because you took a little sample of DNA from a cow and then grew it,
you threw it on life
concerns.
Support in a petri dish for a month. Yeah, that's where I'll draw the line on it. Like the whole plant-based meat, the veggie burgers, no problem with those. I've had them. I think that they're great. I prefer a normal burger over them if I had the choice, but they're good. But the whole synthetic petri dish fake meat grown in a lab stuff, that's where I get a little iffed out on it.
Yeah, and I realize that sometimes we just have to assimilate to it. I don't want to do that. And I'm the kid who grew up in the generation of how many processed foods could I have? Like, could you please pass me my banquet TV dinner followed by a giant glass of Tang or a Hawaiian Punch?
That's astronaut drink to you.
Yeah, I mean, those were the things that we could do. I was the generation that went, wow, Pringles, bring it, right? So processed foods are right up my alley in my age group. But this is one that I feel is a step too far. I'm not quite ready for that.
Yeah, they went too far. They really did.
Yeah, so I'm not okay with that one.
And you were mentioning a lot about the labeling of it, and I thought that was kind of interesting that the labeling on how many hoops that you have to jump through when you're trying to process or sell things like that. And I think that that's a good idea because people have the right to be informed on exactly what they're buying when it comes to meat, on what kind of meat it is and what it's made out of or how it was made. But
Right.
it was reminding me of the label conversations we were having with our calf. I think it was a year ago. And the proper labeling of where the meat is actually originating from in the first place, whether or not it's from overseas, Canada, or right here in the United States, that wasn't necessarily a thing even a year ago. And I don't know if that got passed or if they're still trying to do that. Maybe you have an update on it.
No, work is still being done. I think what you're referring to is called MCOOL, and it has to do
Yes.
with the country of origin labeling. No, that has not passed or anything has changed there. And I think those who are not in favor of it are saying so because, for instance, if you're a cattle producer in Montana and you send your beef to a feedlot in Alberta, Canada to get finished off, or maybe into Manitoba, and then you bring them back into the U.S. for slaughter, they're now no longer called U.S. country of origin labeling because they spent time in Canada, even though they've always belonged to an American producer and were American-owned cattle. So there's some sides to it that have to be examined.
Very interesting, and more things we'll have a conversation about tomorrow because we're out of time. The Jay Thomas Show is coming up next. Have a great rest of your afternoon, everybody. We'll have highs today in the mid and upper 80s with sunny skies.